For years, observers have emphasized the necessity of considering the long-term future regarding the monarchy. Yet King Charles finally shattered his silence, following a devastating update that stunned the public. His composed countenance betrayed a mixture of anguish, fortitude, and veracity as he declared, "Sometimes existence shifts in manners we never imagined, yet we are obligated to confront it." These utterances were weighty. They were authentic. They resonated with millions. The royal household is rattled, and their backers are frightened. This is not merely another regal episode. This is sentimental, grave, and profoundly distressing. Now the entire globe is observing intently, posing the identical query with dread and intrigue. What befell King Charles, and why is this news breaking spirits? Let us uncover the hush that tremored a nation. For 43 agonizing days, the monarch voiced nothing. It was a period where conjecture ran rampant, where headlines shouted hypotheses, and where the British populace held its collective breath, anticipating responses that never arrived. The quiet from Buckingham Palace was not simply abnormal, it was thunderous, and within that stillness, something snapped. Whispers circulated in late November of 2024, suggesting that matters were amiss within the royal family's inner sanctum. Palace personnel detected it initially, noting the manner in which gatherings were being annulled, and the peculiar frequency of private physicians arriving at strange hours. They saw the strained visages of senior aides rushing through hallways that typically resonated with a measured tranquility. Something was transpiring behind those antique barricades, something the institution was striving overtime to conceal. By early December, the British media had picked up the trail. Royal journalists who had spent decades deciphering the subtext of official communiques started assembling a puzzle from scraps of intel. There was a scrapped engagement here, and a mysterious health bulletin there. The king appeared uncommonly stressed during a fleeting public sighting on December 8th. His grin did not quite reach his eyes, and his handshake with a visiting official lingered a fraction too long, as though he were stabilizing himself. Yet Charles uttered nothing. The institution remained mute, and in that information void, the speculation mutated into something gargantuan. Digital platforms erupted, with hypotheses ranging from the credible to the preposterous. Was it his well-being? Was it Prince William? Or had something befallen Princess Catherine following her arduous year? The silence fueled every anxiety, every conspiracy, and every reckless assumption. What the populace failed to comprehend, and what they could not possibly know, was that Charles was not remaining quiet by preference. He was silent out of love. He possessed a desperate yearning to shield those he cherished most from a reality so excruciating that even he could scarcely confront it. The king, having spent his whole existence in the public gaze, was realizing that certain facts are too raw and too shattering to divulge before you have had time to process them personally. The strain escalated from every angle as members of Parliament started posing inquiries. The Archbishop of Canterbury solicited a private audience, and even former palace functionaries broke their customary prudence to voice worry publicly regarding the unheard-of stillness. The mechanisms of the monarchy, that well-lubricated engine which had endured for over a millennium, were grinding to a standstill because the man at its core could not locate the words. At his core, Charles is a man of kindness. Those intimately acquainted with him testify to his gentleness, his authentic concern for individuals, and his capacity to listen with genuine empathy. He dedicated decades to advocating for causes that others disregarded, championing the environment before it was fashionable, fighting for architectural legacy when it was unpopular, and generating chances for underprivileged youth when nobody was watching. This is a gentleman whose heart has consistently been larger than the role seemed to permit, and that heart was fracturing. You could discern it in the scarcity of photographs that surfaced during those 43 days. A man who typically stood with military erectness was slightly stooped. A monarch who had learned to discipline his features into suitable expressions appeared hollow-eyed and older than his actual age. The toll of whatever burden he was shouldering was etched across his visage for anyone who cared to look closely enough. What ultimately ruptured the silence was not a scheduled announcement or a meticulously orchestrated press briefing. It was something far more human. On January 15, 2025, during what was intended to be a standard meeting with the Prime Minister, Charles simply could not maintain his composure any longer. The dam burst. The meticulous control he had sustained for 43 days disintegrated. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, the truth began to spill out. The Prime Minister, a woman recognized for her own ironclad composure, was reportedly moved to tears by what she heard. She immediately cleared her agenda, made calls, and set in motion the machinery that would permit Charles to finally speak publicly about what had been destroying him in private. What she learned in that room was not merely a personal tragedy. It was something that would shake the very foundations of the monarchy. The truth regarding what they hid, which Charles had been frantically trying to protect, began not in 2024 but months prior. It commenced with something minor, something so insignificant that it was simple to dismiss. Queen Camilla, always robust and energetic despite being 77 years old, began feeling uncharacteristically fatigued. She had been the king's anchor through his own health challenges earlier in the year, standing beside him with unwavering fortitude when he faced his own cancer diagnosis. Now it was her turn to struggle, and she did it with characteristic stoicism. At first, she brushed it off, joking with staff about aging and needing more sleep than she was accustomed to. Charles noticed, of course, because a husband of nearly 20 years perceives when his wife is not quite herself. But Camilla insisted she was fine, citing duties to fulfill, engagements to attend, and a role to play. The queen consort does not enjoy the luxury of admitting weakness, especially not when her husband is fighting his own battle. By September of 2024, the exhaustion had become impossible to ignore. Camilla began scaling back her public appearances, canceling engagements that had been on the calendar for months. The official explanations were vague, citing a seasonal illness or the need for rest, suggesting nothing to be concerned about. But behind those carefully worded statements was a growing dread. The tests began in October, involving blood work, scans, and consultations with specialists who arrived through rear entrances and departed through underground passages. Charles accompanied her to every appointment, his face a mask of controlled fear. This was his greatest nightmare coming true. Having already lost one wife tragically, the thought of losing another was more than he could bear. The diagnosis arrived on November 3, 2024, and the date is seared into Charles's memory like a brand. The specialist, a kind-faced woman who had treated members of the royal family for decades, delivered the news with compassion but without sugarcoating. Camilla had a rare autoimmune condition, one that had been attacking her system silently for months. It was treatable, but the treatment would be aggressive, lengthy, and would require her to step back entirely from public life. Charles felt the floor drop out from under him. This was supposed to be their time. After decades of waiting, of being second in line, of preparing and planning, they had finally ascended to the throne. They were supposed to have years ahead of them to serve, to make their mark, and to do the work they had both prepared for. And now, just 18 months into his reign, it was all falling apart. But Camilla's illness was only part of the truth they were hiding. It was the catalyst, but not the whole story. Because, as the queen consort began her treatment, something else began to unravel within the family. Something that Charles had feared for years, but had prayed would never come to pass, was happening. Prince William was struggling. The Prince of Wales, the heir to the throne, the man who was supposed to be the future of the monarchy, was buckling under the weight of it all. His wife's health crisis earlier in the year had shaken him to his core. Watching Catherine battle cancer and supporting her through treatment while maintaining a brave face for their 3 young children had pushed William to his breaking point. And now, with his stepmother also facing serious health issues, with his father's own cancer treatment ongoing, and with the pressure of being next in line feeling more real and immediate than ever, William was falling apart. The cracks were showing in ways that terrified everyone who witnessed them. The confident, capable prince who had seemed so ready to inherit the crown was suddenly revealing just how human, how vulnerable, and how unprepared he actually felt. The arguments behind palace walls grew heated. William, in his fear and frustration, lashed out in ways he never had before. He questioned decisions, challenged his father, and expressed doubts about whether he even wanted the role that had been his destiny since birth. The dutiful son was rebelling, and Charles did not know how to reach him. Catherine, still recovering herself, tried to mediate. She understood her husband's pain, his fear, and his overwhelming sense of being trapped by circumstances beyond his control. But she was too fragile herself to carry the weight of holding everyone together. The woman who had been the steady, graceful presence in the family was barely holding on to her own equilibrium. Charles found himself in an impossible position. His wife wanted him. His son wanted him. His daughter-in-law wanted support, and his grandchildren wanted stability. The country wanted a functioning monarch, yet he was just one man carrying cancer in his own body, grief in his heart, and the weight of 1,000 years of history on his shoulders. The palace staff watched helplessly as the family they served struggled. They saw the king emerging from meetings with his son, looking devastated. They heard raised voices coming from rooms that were supposed to be soundproof. They witnessed tears being hastily wiped away before public appearances, and they kept their mouths shut because that is what loyalty demands. But secrets of this magnitude do not stay secret forever. By December, people were starting to talk, not to the press just yet, but among themselves. The whispers grew louder that something was very wrong in the House of Windsor. The question was not whether the truth would come out, but when, how, and who would control the narrative when it did. Charles has always been a father first, even when the world expected him to be a prince first. From the moment William was born on June 21, 1982, something shifted in Charles. The young man who had seemed uncertain about so many things became fiercely certain about one thing. He was going to be present for his sons in ways his own parents could not be for him. He changed nappies, got down on the floor to play, and broke protocol to hug his boys in public to show them physical affection. When the world was watching as his marriage to Diana fell apart, Charles carried guilt that still haunts him. He knows he failed her, and he knows the choices he made caused pain. But through all of it, he tried desperately to protect his sons from the worst of it. He shielded them as much as he could, putting their needs above his own desires more times than anyone will ever know. Being their father was the role he valued above all others, even above being heir to the throne. Now, decades later, with William a 42-year-old man and father himself, Charles was discovering that a father's protective instincts do not diminish with time. They intensify. Watching his eldest son struggle, Seeing the weight of future kingship crushing William's spirit was more painful than anything Charles had endured in his own life. He would have taken on William's burden if he could. He would have carried it all himself to spare his son one moment of suffering. But that is not how monarchy works. The crown passes from parent to child whether anyone wants it or not. It is an inheritance that cannot be refused, a destiny that cannot be altered. Charles knew this better than anyone, having spent 73 years waiting for a role he never asked for, preparing for a job he could not escape. And now he was watching his son face that same inescapable reality, and it was destroying them both. The dilemma was this. As a father, Charles wanted to tell William he did not have to do this. He wanted to say that if the burden was too much, if the pain was too great, there were other paths. He wanted to give his son permission to be human, to be vulnerable, to step back if he wanted to. But as king, Charles could not say any of those things. The monarchy does not work if the heir to the throne can just walk away. The line of succession is not optional. William's destiny was sealed the moment Charles became king. The weight of history pressed down on him until he could barely breathe. His private secretary found him one night in early January, sitting in the dark, tears streaming down his face. The King of England was weeping like a child, overwhelmed by responsibilities he could not meet and problems he could not solve. The secretary, a man who had served the royal family for 30 years, had never seen Charles like this, and it terrified him. Charles tried to explain through his tears that he was failing everyone. He was failing Camilla by not being strong enough to support her through her illness. He was failing William by not knowing how to help him. He was failing Catherine by not protecting her from the additional stress of family drama while she recovered. He was failing his grandchildren by allowing their world to become so unstable. And he was failing the nation by not being the steady, reliable monarch they deserved. Charles found himself thinking about his mother more than ever. Queen Elizabeth II had managed this impossible balance for 70 years. She had been both a devoted monarch and a loving mother, somehow serving the crown while raising 4 children. But had she really managed it? Or had she simply chosen the crown over her children again and again, in ways large and small? Charles remembered the loneliness of his childhood, the formality and the distance. His mother's duty always came first, and he had spent his life trying to do better with his own sons. But now he was discovering that maybe there was no better way. Maybe the crown demanded everything and left nothing for the people you loved. Maybe his mother had not been cold or distant by choice, but by necessity. Maybe this was the price every monarch paid, and he had been naive to think he could avoid it. The meetings with William became increasingly painful. His son would sit across from him, exhausted and angry, and Charles would see himself at 42. He would see the same trapped feeling, the same resentment at a life chosen for him before he was born, and the same desperate desire to be anything other than what he was destined to become. And Charles had no comfort to offer because he knew the truth. It does not get easier. You do not make peace with it. You just learn to carry it day after day, year after year, until carrying it is all you know how to do. By mid-January, Charles realized he was out of options. The silence could not continue, and the pretense could not hold. Something had to give, and it was going to have to be him. He was going to have to choose between protecting his family's privacy and serving the public's right to know, between being a father and being a king. And whichever choice he made, he was going to lose something precious. The morning of January 15, 2025, dawned cold and gray over London. Charles woke at 5:30, as he always did, but could not bring himself to get out of bed. Camilla was asleep beside him, her breathing steady but shallow. The medication she was taking made her drowsy and robbed her of the vibrant energy that had always been her defining characteristic. He watched her sleep and felt his heart break all over again. By 7 he was dressed and sitting in his study, staring at a blank piece of paper. He had tried to write a statement a dozen times over the past week, but the words would not come. How do you summarize a family's pain in a press release? How do you reduce complex human suffering to bullet points and official palace language? It felt impossible, and maybe it was. The meeting with the Prime Minister was scheduled for 10 Sadanfan, intended to be a routine discussion about upcoming legislation, the kind of constitutional duty that filled Charles's calendar. But when she arrived and saw his face, she knew immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. The king looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside, leaving only a shell that vaguely resembled the monarch she had met with dozens of times before. They sat in the formal receiving room, the one with portraits of Queen Victoria staring down at them with stern disapproval. The Prime Minister asked a polite question about an upcoming state visit, and Charles just shook his head. He could not do this. He could not pretend for one more second that everything was fine when nothing was fine. The words started coming slowly at first, then faster, tumbling over each other in a rush of pent-up emotion. He told her about Camilla's diagnosis, about the severity of her condition, and about the aggressive treatment she had already started. He told her about William's crisis of faith in his own destiny, about the arguments, and about the fear that his son might actually walk away from everything. He told her about Catherine's ongoing recovery and how fragile she still was. He told her about his own cancer, about the treatments he was still undergoing, and about the exhaustion that never left him. And then he told her the worst part, the part he had barely been able to admit to himself. He did not know if he could do this anymore. The King of England was sitting across from the Prime Minister, tears streaming down his face, admitting that he was breaking under the weight of the crown. He had thought he was prepared for this role. He had spent his entire life preparing. But nothing could have prepared him for the reality of being monarch while watching everyone he loved suffer. The Prime Minister, to her credit, did not flinch. She did not try to minimize his pain or offer empty platitudes. She just listened. And when he finally fell silent, exhausted by the confession, she asked him a simple question. What did he need? Not what did the crown need, not what did the nation need, but what did Charles, the man, the father, the husband, need? The question broke something open in him because nobody had asked him that in months, maybe years. Everyone always asked what the king wanted, what the monarchy mandated, or what duty demanded. But what did Charles need? He wanted to stop pretending. He wanted to tell the truth, and he wanted to ask for help. He wanted the world to understand that he was human, that his family was human, and that they were all struggling and could not carry it alone anymore. The Prime Minister made the calls, and within 2 hours, a plan was in motion. There would be a televised address, not a formal speech from the throne room, but something more intimate and more honest. Charles would speak directly to the nation from his study at Clarence House, the place where he had spent so many sleepless nights wrestling with these truths. No scripts written by advisors, no carefully vetted talking points. Just a father and a king telling his people what was really happening behind the palace walls. The broadcast was scheduled for 7:00 that evening. News of the king's address spread like wildfire through the media. Speculation ran rampant. Was he abdicating? Was there a constitutional crisis, or had something happened to William? The palace refused to comment, which only intensified the frenzy. By 6:02, the entire nation was glued to their televisions, waiting. At 6:45, Charles walked into his study alone. The cameras were set up, the lights were bright, and a single chair faced the lens. No desk to hide behind, no barrier between him and the millions who would watch. He sat down, looked directly at the camera, and waited for the signal that they were live. When the red light came on, Charles took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice was steady but thick with emotion. He started by thanking people for their patience during the long silence. He acknowledged that the lack of information had caused worry and speculation, and he apologized for that. But then he said something no British monarch had ever said before. He said he had been silent because he did not know how to speak about pain this deep while maintaining the dignity the crown mandated. He told them about Camilla, about her illness, about her treatment, and about how she had been suffering in silence while trying to support him through his own health challenges. He spoke about her with such tenderness and such obvious love that even the most cynical viewers found themselves moved. This was not a king talking about his consort. This was a husband talking about his wife, terrified of losing her. Then he spoke about William. He did not betray his son's confidence or reveal the private details of their struggles, but he spoke honestly about the pressure facing the next generation of royals. He spoke about how William and Catherine had faced enormous health challenges in 2024 and about how the weight of future responsibility was bearing down on a young family trying to heal. He spoke about how he, as a father, was watching his son struggle and feeling helpless to protect him. Charles's voice cracked when he talked about his grandchildren. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis deserved a childhood free from the weight of what was coming. They deserved parents who were not crushed by duty and illness and fear. They deserved a grandfather who could be present for them instead of being consumed by the demands of the crown. But he did not know how to give them any of that. And then he said the thing that made headlines around the world. He said he was asking the British people for something monarchs are not supposed to ask for. He was asking for grace, for patience, and for understanding that the royal family, despite the crowns and the palaces and the centuries of tradition, were just people. They were flawed, struggling, and sometimes breaking people who were doing their best under impossible circumstances. He admitted he did not have all the answers. He admitted he was scared. He admitted that some days he woke up and did not know how he was going to get through them. And he asked his people to support his family through this crisis the way British families have always supported each other through hard times. He asked for compassion, for space to heal, and for faith that they would emerge stronger on the other side. The address lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, Charles sat in silence for a long moment before the cameras were turned off. Then he stood, walked out of his study, and went to find Camilla. He had done it. He had told the truth. And now they would all have to live with the consequences, the fallout, and a family divided. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Within minutes of Charles's broadcast ending, social media erupted. News channels scrambled to analyze every word, every pause, and every emotion that had crossed the king's face. The world had just witnessed something unprecedented. A reigning British monarch admitting vulnerability, asking for help, and revealing the depth of private family struggles. It was historic, it was shocking, and it tore open divisions within the royal family that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Prince William watched the broadcast from Adelaide Cottage, with Catherine beside him. As his father's words filled their living room, William's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, and betrayal. His hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles turned white. When it ended, he sat in stunned silence for a full minute before standing abruptly and leaving the room. Catherine found him outside pacing in the cold January darkness, his breath forming clouds in the night air. William felt exposed. Yes, his father had not revealed the specifics of their arguments or the depth of his crisis, but the implication was there for anyone paying attention. The heir to the throne was struggling, and the future king was buckling under pressure. William had spent his entire adult life carefully crafting a public image of capability and readiness. In 17 minutes, his father had undermined all of that work. The headlines were already writing themselves, posing questions about William's fitness for future kingship, speculating about whether he might abdicate, and casting doubts about the stability of the succession. Catherine tried to calm him, but she was struggling with her own complicated feelings. Part of her understood Charles's desperation and his need to be honest after months of suffocating silence. But another part of her resented being pulled into this public narrative when she was still trying to heal in private. Her cancer battle had been the most difficult experience of her life, and she had fought hard to maintain some boundaries around it. Now it was being discussed in the context of a royal family crisis, her illness reduced to one more cause of pressure on the monarchy. At Clarence House, Charles waited for the phone to ring. He knew William would be furious. He had warned his son earlier that day about the broadcast, but William had been in the middle of a school pickup and could not talk. The rushed conversation had been tense, with Charles trying to explain his reasoning, while William fired back questions he did not have time to answer properly. Now, as the minutes ticked by without contact, Charles felt the distance between them growing wider with each passing second. The call finally came at 8:47. William's voice was tight with controlled rage. He asked his father how he could do this without properly consulting him first. He asked how he could expose their family's private struggles to public scrutiny without giving William a chance to prepare or to protect his own children from the inevitable media frenzy. Charles tried to explain that the silence had become unsustainable, that the speculation was worse than the truth, and that they wanted to control the narrative before it controlled them. But William was not listening. He had heard enough justifications. He ended the call after less than 3 minutes, leaving Charles holding a dead phone and feeling more alone than ever. Princess Anne's reaction was characteristically blunt. She called her brother within an hour of the broadcast and told him he had made a catastrophic mistake. The monarchy had survived for over 1,000 years by maintaining mystique and by never letting the public see the messy humanity behind the crown. Their mother had understood this perfectly, enduring personal tragedies, family scandals, and political crises without ever breaking the fourth wall or asking the public for sympathy. Anne believed Charles had just set a dangerous precedent that would weaken the institution irreparably. But Anne's criticism, harsh as it was, came from a place of concern for the monarchy itself. The reaction from other quarters of the family was more personal and more bitter. Extended family members, who had spent years maintaining their own careful public images, felt betrayed. Charles had made vulnerability acceptable and had made it possible to admit struggle. But in doing so, he had also made everyone else's stoic silence look cold by comparison. Why had they not spoken up about their own difficulties? Why had they maintained the stiff upper lip while the king was allowed to break down? Queen Camilla, weak from treatment but fierce in her loyalty, became Charles's strongest defender. She made calls from her bed, her voice faint but determined. She reminded people that her husband was fighting cancer while trying to be a king, a father, and a husband. She asked them to show the same compassion they would demand for anyone else facing similar circumstances. But even Camilla's advocacy created tension. Some saw her as appropriately supportive, while others whispered that she was too close to the situation and too emotionally invested to see clearly. The public reaction was deeply divided. Millions responded with an outpouring of support and sympathy. They saw a man being courageously honest about mental health, family pressure, and the impossible standards placed on public figures. They appreciated his vulnerability and saw it as strength rather than weakness. Social media filled with messages of encouragement, with people sharing their own family struggles and thanking the king for making it acceptable to admit imperfection. But there was backlash, too. Critics accused Charles of being self-indulgent, of using his platform to garner sympathy when ordinary people face similar challenges without the resources and privilege he enjoyed. They questioned whether someone who could not handle the pressure should be wearing the crown at all. Calls for abdication remained fringe, but grew louder than they had been in decades. The tabloids, sensing blood in the water, began running stories about palace insiders questioning Charles's judgment and fitness for continued reign. For Charles, the most painful division was the one closest to home. By January 18th, 3 days after the broadcast, William and Charles still had not spoken beyond that brief, angry phone call. Catherine had reached out to Camilla with a message of support, but the conversation had been strained, with both women trying to bridge a gap that felt wider than words could span. The children were confused, picking up on the tension even if they did not understand its cause. Prince George, at 11 years old and increasingly aware of what his future held, asked his father questions William did not know how to answer. The unity the royal family had always presented to the world, that carefully maintained image of a cohesive institution working together toward common goals, had shattered. Everyone involved knew that putting it back together, if that was even possible, would require far more than apologies and carefully worded statements. It would require fundamental changes in how they related to each other, how they balanced duty with humanity, and how they navigated the impossible space between being public symbols and private people. The question was whether they had the strength, the will, and the love for each other to do that work. And nobody, not even Charles himself, knew the answer. The future of the British monarchy has been debated countless times over the past century. After every scandal, every controversy, and every moment when the institution seemed vulnerable, questions arose about whether the crown would survive. But this moment feels different. This is not about external pressure or public scandal. This is about the heart of the institution questioning itself. It is about the people who embody the monarchy wondering if they can continue carrying something this heavy. Charles knows he set something in motion that cannot be undone. The monarchy, after his broadcast, will never be the same as it was before. The question is whether the change will strengthen the institution or begin its slow dissolution. There are compelling arguments on both sides, and the king lies awake at night turning them over in his mind, searching for answers that remain frustratingly out of reach. On one hand, his honesty might have forged a new connection with the British people. In an age where authenticity is valued above almost everything else, where people can spot performance and pretense from miles away, a monarch who admits struggle might be exactly what the crown needs. The younger generations in particular have responded positively to Charles's vulnerability. They see it as brave, as necessary, and as a sign that even the most traditional institutions can evolve. If the monarchy is to survive beyond Charles's reign, it needs the support of people born in the 1990s and 2000s, people who have no memory of Queen Elizabeth's golden age and little patience for outdated notions of royal mystique. But the risk is enormous. The monarchy's power has always derived partly from its distance, its otherness, and its connection to something beyond ordinary human experience. when kings and queens become too relatable and too ordinary. The argument goes, why should they remain kings and queens at all? If they struggle just like everyone else, and if they break just like everyone else, what justifies their position at the apex of British society? Charles may have won sympathy, but he may have also planted seeds of doubt about whether the institution itself still serves a purpose in the 21st century. The immediate practical concerns are overwhelming. Camilla's treatment will continue for at least 6 more months, possibly longer, depending on how her body responds. During that time, she will be unable to perform any public duties. Charles will have to shoulder the ceremonial and constitutional responsibilities alone while managing his own ongoing health issues. The palace has already announced a scaled-back schedule, but there are limits to how much can be cancelled or postponed without raising questions about the monarchy's ability to function. William's situation is even more precarious. The Prince of Wales is facing a crisis of identity and purpose that cannot be resolved quickly or easily. He needs time and space to work through his feelings about his destiny and to find a way to make peace with the role waiting for him. But time is exactly what he does not have. Every day he steps back is a day the succession looks unstable. Every public appearance he makes while still internally conflicted risks revealing the depth of his uncertainty. He is trapped in an impossible position, and Charles does not know how to help him escape it. Catherine's recovery continues, but the added stress of family turmoil is not helping. She needs calm, stability, and support to fully heal both physically and emotionally. Instead, she is watching her husband spiral, managing confused children, and dealing with renewed media scrutiny about her health. The woman who has been the steady, graceful heart of the younger generation of royals is being asked to hold together more than any one person reasonably can. There are conversations happening in government circles about contingency plans. Nothing official, and nothing that would ever be acknowledged publicly, but quiet discussions about what happens if Charles's health deteriorates significantly. What happens if William decides he truly cannot continue on the path laid out for him? What happens if the direct line of succession becomes untenable? Princess Charlotte is only 9 years old, and Prince George is 11. The idea of a regency, of Princess Anne or another senior royal governing until George comes of age, is being whispered about in corners of Westminster and Whitehall. The Commonwealth is watching closely too. Charles has spent years building relationships with member nations, working to transform the organization from a relic of empire into a voluntary association of equals. But his broadcast has raised questions abroad as well as at home. Leaders of Commonwealth nations are wondering if the monarchy has the stability to continue serving as the symbolic head of their association. Some are using this moment of vulnerability to push for their countries to become republics, to finally sever the last constitutional ties to the British Crown. Charles has scheduled a family meeting for February the 1st, 2025. Every senior royal has been summoned to Windsor Castle for what is being called a discussion about the future, but everyone knows it is really about damage control and deciding on a path forward. William has agreed to attend, though his agreement came only after Catherine convinced him it was necessary. Anne will be there, ready with her characteristic directness. Prince Edward and Sophie will come, the quiet, steady voices that often get overlooked, but frequently offer the wisest counsel. The agenda for that meeting is daunting. They need to address public perception, family dynamics, health realities, and constitutional requirements all at once. They need to find a way to present a united front, while acknowledging that unity does not mean suppressing legitimate concerns or differences. They need to chart a course that serves both the institution and the individuals who comprise it. It is a nearly impossible task, made more difficult by the raw emotions still flowing through every relationship. Charles is preparing for that meeting with a sense of both hope and dread. Hope, because conversation is always better than silence, and because bringing problems into the light is the first step toward solving them. Dread, because he knows there are no easy answers and no simple solutions that will satisfy everyone involved. Some of what needs to be said will be painful. Some of the changes that need to be made will be resisted. Some of the wounds that have been opened will not heal quickly, if they heal at all. But beneath the uncertainty and fear, there is also a strange sense of relief. The truth is out now. The pretense has been stripped away. The royal family stands revealed as human, flawed, struggling, and uncertain. It is terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Whatever happens next, they will face it honestly, rather than hiding behind carefully constructed facades. The future of the monarchy may well depend on what happens in the next few months. Can Charles maintain his health while carrying the crown? Can Camilla recover fully? Can William find his footing and recommit to his destiny? Can Catherine heal completely? Can the family repair the divisions that have been exposed? Can the institution evolve while maintaining the essence of what makes it meaningful? Nobody knows the answers. Not Charles, not his advisors, not the constitutional experts, and not the political analysts offering opinions on every news channel. The royal family is in uncharted territory, navigating by instinct and hope rather than established precedent. They are making it up as they go along, trying to balance 1,000 years of tradition with the pressing needs of the present moment. What is clear is that the monarchy will look different on the other side of this crisis. Either it will emerge renewed, more human, and connected to the people it serves, or it will begin a slow decline into irrelevance. The choice between those futures is not entirely in Charles's control. It depends on William finding his strength. It depends on public opinion, which shifts like sand. And it depends on events no one can predict or prevent. But Charles has made his choice. He has chosen honesty over pretense, humanity over mystique, and love over duty when the two are incompatible. Whether that choice saves the monarchy or hastens its end, he believes it was the right thing to do. Because at the end of his life, when he looks back on his reign, he does not want to remember himself as a king who let fear and tradition destroy his family. He wants to remember himself as a father who fought for his children, a husband who supported his wife, and a man who tried to do right by everyone he loved, even when the cost was everything he had spent his life working toward.